This is NTD Evening News. Live from our NTD Global Headquarters in New York City, here is Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris meeting separately with the Israeli Prime Minister as the White House says a ceasefire deal is coming. The administration also strongly condemns pro-Hamas protests that turned violent. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao has the story.
The White House says that a top agenda for President Biden's meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu today was to talk about how to close the remaining gaps in reaching a ceasefire deal in Gaza. The meeting comes a day after President Biden, during his Oval Office address to the nation, said that ending the war in Gaza remains a top priority in his remaining months as the president. And Netanyahu today thanking President Biden for supporting Israel for the past 5 decades.
Well, welcome back, Mr. Prime Minister. We got a lot to talk about.
Mr. President, we've known each other for 40 years. I want to thank you for 50 years of public service and 50 years of support for the state of Israel.
The White House today also pushed back against speculation that President Biden dropping out of the 2024 race would affect the progress with ceasefire negotiations. Instead, the White House says a deal is coming close. The White House also condemned pro-Hamas protesters in Washington, D.C., who during Netanyahu's visit on Wednesday burned down an American flag, replaced it with Palestinian flags, and sprayed graffiti reading "Hamas is coming."
And when you burn an American flag and pull it down off a U.S. government site, that's just absolutely unacceptable.
And Vice President Kamala Harris, who is meeting separately with Netanyahu today, also strongly condemned these protests. She wrote in her statement that these actions are, quote, despicable acts by unpatriotic protesters and dangerous hate-fueled rhetoric. Harris added in her statement that the American flag should, quote, never be desecrated in that way. And last night, a group of lawmakers put the American flag back up at the same spot. Here's Mike Johnson, the House Speaker, speaking right after that.
They flew Palestinian flags on these poles today. It was outrageous. They were pulled down, thankfully. But the American flags have not been put back up.
And former President Trump said today in an interview that Israel needs to do better with its public relations. He's meeting with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu tomorrow at Mar-a-Lago. And on the 2024 race, Harris said today that she's ready to debate Trump, adding that she's already agreed to a September 10th debate.
But I'm ready, and I think the voters deserve to see the split screen that exists.
Trump said this week that he absolutely wants to debate Harris and that he wants to debate her for more than just one time. Reporting from the White House, Iris Tao, NTD News.
The Israel military has recovered the bodies of 5 Israelis in the Gaza Strip. And in another development, residents in the Gaza Strip and Israel are reacting to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's recent speech to Congress. NTD's Jason Perry has the war update.
Seen through night vision goggles, Israeli troops moved around the area where they recovered the bodies of 5 Israelis in the Gaza Strip. They are the bodies of 56-year-old Maya Goren, 51-year-old Ravid Katz, 33-year-old Oren Golden, 20-year-old Staff Sergeant Tomer Ahimas, and 19-year-old Sergeant Kirill Brodsky. On Thursday, the Israel Defense Forces said these individuals were all murdered on October 7th, and terrorists took their bodies back to Gaza.
The Hamas terror organization abducted our hostages into their tunnels, 20 meters below the city of Khan Yunis. This was underneath an area that was previously designated as a humanitarian area by the IDF. An area for Gazan civilians to move away from the battlefield and receive humanitarian aid and shelter.
The IDF also reported on Thursday that Hamas terrorists fired more rockets from a humanitarian area, and one of the rockets hit a United Nations school, killing 2 civilians and injuring others. And in another development, residents in the Gaza Strip gave their reactions to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's recent speech to Congress.
Was that a speech? Where was the positivity in the speech? What was the core of the speech and the deals that will take place in the future?
Regarding Netanyahu's speech, we were expecting that there will be a truce. This is our only hope during this period, but we were severely shocked.
And Israeli residents also gave their reactions to Netanyahu's remarks.
I think that he said all the right things. I think that he made all the important points. I think he argued very much for the state of Israel.
It was a good speech. I think he should have emphasized a bit more about the hostage deal and how hard it is to negotiate with a terrorist organization. I think it's a very complicated situation, and that complication didn't come through in his speech.
Netanyahu said the hostages would be released soon, and he also laid out a post-war vision of Gaza that he said would be led by Palestinians who do not seek to destroy Israel. Jason Perry, NTD News.
Tens of thousands of protesters are reportedly expected to be at the Democratic National Convention this year. This comes amid wars in Gaza and Ukraine and more. The Secret Service and other agencies today laid out how they'll guarantee safety at the event. NTD's Arian Pazdar has the details.
The assassination attempt of former President Donald Trump on July 13th was a terrible day for our entire nation.
The Democratic National Convention in August comes on the heels of the assassination attempt of former President Trump. Chicago was chosen to host the DNC a while ago. The shooting at Trump's rally wasn't the only thing that has changed since then, as the city's mayor points out.
Now Chicago is not just hosting another convention. We are welcoming a new breath of life into our nation with the historic nomination of Vice President Kamala Harris.
A crowd of 50,000 people is reportedly expected to be in town for the convention. Many of them are going there to protest. USA Today reports that pro-Palestine organizations alone expect tens of thousands of activists to be in Chicago.
I want everyone to know that the Secret Service and our public safety partners respect every American's First Amendment rights.
The chief of Chicago's police department agreed, but added that they will take necessary steps to ensure safety.
What we will not tolerate is vandalism to our city. What we will not tolerate is violent activity. If we see that, we will put an end to it quickly.
This comes just one day after pro-Palestine protesters burned an American flag outside the Capitol building in D.C. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker seemed confident that the convention will take place without any major issues, pointing to the fact that law enforcement mapped out every aspect and detail of the event.
With these comprehensive public safety plans and security measures, we should sleep soundly knowing how much preparation has been done.
Now, it's important to note that these safety measures might take a toll on Chicago residents. So if you're in the area, you should expect roadblocks and more. And also, the Secret Service Department in charge of the event also secured the Republican National Convention last week and a recent NATO summit in Washington. Now, they say they expect the DNC to also go over smoothly by taking the same safety precautions as before. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
The DNC yesterday officially changed its delegate voting procedure to a virtual roll call. They're hoping to have a nominee by August 7th. NTD's Arlene Richards finds out why Speaker Mike Johnson thinks this could cause legal problems.
With less than a month to go before the Democratic National Convention, the DNC Rules Committee quickly hammered out a new process on Wednesday. They officially adopted a procedure that will enable a virtual roll call to determine the party's presidential nominee by August 7th. The DNC expects the process to remain open to qualified candidates who must file a formal declaration of candidacy, meet party and legal qualifications, and gather at least 300 delegate signatures. But the window of time is short, and Kamala Harris has gotten a running start, with the majority of Biden's nearly 4,000 delegates pledging to back her. By expediting the delegate votes before the convention begins, the DNC is hoping to avoid potential legal challenges. But Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson says a Harris nomination could result in some legal problems.
We have 50 different systems in each of the states when it comes to presidential elections and choosing electors and all the rest. And in some of the states, there are impediments to just switching someone out like that. Look, if it violates the rules in some of these states, I expect that there will be litigation over that.
Generally, states allow individuals to participate in primaries or caucuses to elect delegates who support their presidential candidate of choice. At national party conventions, the presidential contender with the most state delegate votes wins the party nomination. But state laws differ on whether or not delegates are allowed to change their votes at the convention. For example, Oklahoma requires its delegates to vote for the same candidate on all ballots. In New Mexico, delegates face misdemeanor charges if they change their votes. Other states like New Hampshire require delegates to vote for the same candidate, but only if he stays in the race. And still others, like New Jersey, follow the convention's rules. States also have deadlines for when a nominee can be placed on their ballots. Ohio's deadline is August 7th. They recently changed their rules so the DNC could make the deadline. But the change doesn't go into effect until September 1st. Johnson told CNN the DNC can't just replace Joe Biden.
I mean, every state has their own election system. That's our constitutional system. That's the way it's done. And in some of these states, it's a real hurdle. They have a real problem of replacing the nominee at the top of the ticket. Remember, Jake, I mean, Joe Biden was chosen after a long, small d Democratic process by 14 million people emerging through that primary.
Michael Gerhardt, a University of North Carolina constitutional law professor, told PolitiFact there's no real problem with replacing Biden. He said the Democratic nominee has not become official yet. Ballot deadlines in states have not been violated in any way, and the rules of the convention are fully intact and in force. Gerhardt and other legal experts say that since President Biden was not an official nominee, he didn't appear on any state's ballot. Therefore, there's no nominee to replace. The DNC will hold its in-person convention from August 19 to 22nd. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
The House has passed a resolution condemning Vice President Kamala Harris's handling of the border crisis as most Democrats rally behind their new presumptive nominee. NTD's Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has more from Capitol Hill.
6 Democrats voted with Republicans to condemn Vice President Kamala Harris for her handling of the border crisis. The resolution refers to President Joe Biden's decision back in 2021 to select Vice President Harris to lead the administration's border policies. The resolution also refers to Vice President Harris as the border czar.
There is no such thing as a border czar, and it's just continuing to use the official authority and official resources of Congress for partisan political electoral purposes.
Democratic lawmakers praised the Biden-Harris administration. For example, Congressman Maxwell Frost, a Democrat from Florida, compared President Joe Biden's address to the nation Thursday night, where he explained his reasoning for not seeking re-election, to George Washington.
One of the reasons that we look to and admire George Washington so much is because he knew when the time was to pass along power, to step down. President Biden has cemented his legacy in a very similar way. One of the most effective presidencies in the history of our country, the most progressive president in the history of our country, and now someone who has made this hard decision to pass the torch. I think history will remember this kindly.
After votes this Thursday, Congress will not reconvene until mid-September when Congress is back in session. They will have 2 weeks to pass the remaining appropriation bills to fund government through fiscal year 2025. Something some Republicans believe is highly unlikely.
No, absolutely, it was not good. You know, Kevin McCarthy got 7 of the 12 passed before he was wrongfully ousted, and then now Mike Johnson has gotten 5. They're probably going to be forcing us to vote on a CR.
House Republicans have passed 5 out of the 12 appropriation bills thus far, all 5 on party lines. Those 5 bills represent approximately 75% of government spending for fiscal year 2025. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
California is officially tackling homeless encampments. Governor Gavin Newsom is ordering state officials to remove them from public spaces. NTD's Eileen Ange has more on the decision.
California Governor Gavin Newsom issued an executive order Thursday to direct state agencies on how to remove homeless encampments. This comes a month after a Supreme Court ruling allowed cities to enforce bans on sleeping outside in public spaces.
Today, we've invested now over $1 billion in encampment resolution grants, not only to clean up sites like this, but to address the underlying issue in the first place.
Newsom's order is aimed at the thousands of tents and makeshift shelters across the state that line freeways, clutter shopping center parking lots, and fill city parks. While Newsom cannot order local authorities to act, his administration can apply pressure by withholding money for counties and cities. Earlier this summer, the U.S. Supreme Court decided to enforce bans on sleeping outside in public spaces. The case was the most significant on the issue to come before the High Court in decades. It comes as cities across the country have wrestled with the issue of how to deal with a rising number of people without a permanent place to live and public frustration over related health and safety issues. California is home to roughly 1/3 of the nation's population of homeless people. Newsom touted that his administration has spent roughly $24 billion aimed at cleaning up streets and housing people, but acknowledged the stubbornness of the issue. Newsom's administration has also come under fire recently after a state audit found that the state didn't consistently track whether the huge outlay of public money actually improved the situation. Under Newsom's direction, state agencies, including state parks and Department of Transportation, would be required to prioritize clearing encampments that pose safety risks, such as those camping along waterways. Officials should give advance notice to vacate, connect homeless people to local services, and help store belongings for at least 60 days. Local cities and counties are urged to adopt similar protocols.
A California prosecutor says a 42-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of starting a wildfire that has become the state's largest this year. Butte County District Attorney Mike Ramsey says Cal Fire arson investigators made the arrest early today after a man was seen pushing a burning car into a gully yesterday afternoon. The flames exploded into what is now known as the Park Fire, which has already scorched more than 100 square miles near the city of Chico in Northern California. The DA says the suspect's name will be released later. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. China and Russia patrolling near American territory. The U.S. and Canada intercepted 4 Chinese and Russian bombers near Alaska Wednesday. These bombers are nuclear capable. The U.S. Defense Chief said it's not a surprise.
It's the first time that we've seen these two countries fly together like that. They didn't enter our airspace. I think the closest point of approach was about 200 miles off of our coast.
The Chinese and Russian bombers were in a joint patrol in the airspace of the Chukchi and Bering Seas, waters near Alaska. They were intercepted in Alaska's Air Defense Identification Zone. The zone serves as a buffer between international airspace and a country's sovereign airspace. It gives a country time to identify and respond to what type of foreign aircraft is coming near. China regularly flies jets into Taiwan's Air Identification Zone. It's one of the regime's gray zone warfare tactics against the island, designed to intimidate and exert pressure on it. The U.S. military said these jets remained in international airspace and did not enter American or Canadian airspace, adding that this activity is not seen as a threat, but the U.S. would continue monitoring the situation. Over on Capitol Hill, lawmakers gave their reactions.
They don't belong in our airspace. You know, I will certainly watch and see what happens with it.
They're testing us. They're making a statement.
China said the joint patrol has nothing to do with the current international situation. Russia said it's a new area of joint operations. Just 2 weeks ago, 4 Chinese warships inched closer to U.S. waters in Alaska. The Chinese ships were in international waters, but still inside the U.S. Exclusive Economic Zone, or EEZ. The zone spans 200 nautical miles from the U.S. shoreline. The Chinese ships told the U.S. Coast Guard via radio that they were conducting freedom of navigation operations. The U.S. Coast Guard ship monitored the Chinese ships until they left. A Florida man has been charged with spying for Beijing. Authorities say for more than a decade, he spied on Falun Gong practitioners and other dissidents in the U.S.
The DOJ announced on Wednesday that it charged Ping Li with spying on Chinese dissidents and U.S. firms, all for the Chinese Communist Party, for over a decade. Li is a China-born U.S. citizen, resident of Florida, and for over 13 years, he allegedly worked with China's intelligence agency, the Ministry of State Security. This includes providing information directly to the CCP about the telecommunications company he worked at, as well as information that could be used to harm U.S. citizens and their families back in China. Authorities say that his targets included pro-democracy activists, as well as U.S. politicians and nonprofits, and practitioners and supporters of the spiritual group Falun Gong. This is the latest in federal action against Beijing's attempts to suppress Falun Gong in the United States. Falun Gong, also known as Falun Dafa, is heavily persecuted by the Chinese regime. In May 2023, the DOJ charged 2 suspected Chinese agents with attempting to bribe the IRS. They allegedly aimed to revoke the nonprofit status of an entity run by Falun Gong practitioners. We've reached out to Lee's lawyers but haven't heard back so far, and if Lee is convicted on these charges, he faces up to 15 years in prison. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Jack Bradley, NTD News.
To discuss this case and the broader issue of Chinese espionage, earlier we spoke with General Robert Spalding, former senior defense official and defense attaché to China in Beijing, and Levi Browde, executive director of the Falun Dafa Information Center. General Spalding, Levi Browde, thank you both so much for joining us. Levi, I want to start with you. The DOJ just unsealed an indictment about an alleged Chinese spy in Florida yesterday. Now, according to court filings, he was employed by Chinese intelligence in Wuhan for over 12 years. Just how significant is this case?
Well, I think the case is significant because it exhibits that the CCP's target everyday American citizens and residents. And we tend to think of spies going after other government workers or other spies, and really this shows how the priority that the CCP places on going after any voice, even if they're sort of everyday citizens or residents, that is countering the CCP narrative or exposing them on the world stage. So I think it's very important from that standpoint, but I would also caution that this is a very tiny tip of a very large iceberg. This is just one case. There are so many other cases out there that we're probably missing.
And General, this was a telecom worker in Florida. Now, you've been warning for years about the dangers of telecoms, especially when it comes to 5G. How does that play into the way the Chinese regime conducts espionage, especially overseas?
Well, I think people are aware of, being able to plant certain things in the network to be able to extract data. That's why there's a big push to get rid of Huawei. But it also extends to the employees. This is not the first time that a Chinese employee, it's happened in Europe as well, has used the telecom resources to extract data that the Chinese Communist Party wants. And I think most companies aren't aware that the Chinese Communist Party does a good job of indoctrinating the population. They also have laws that say that you have to support espionage by law. They will put pressure on family members. So if you have a Chinese national working in your company, you might think, oh, this is a great person, they're friendly. But at the same time, they have been taught and trained, and they are pressured to do things that the Chinese Communist Party wants them to do.
And Levi, you actually recently published a piece in The Diplomat emphasizing the internal CCP treatment when it comes to Falun Gong. Now, did they say anything relevant to this case?
Yeah, I mean, since the very beginning, they've been trying to marginalize Falun Gong and convince the West, among other things, that it's a tiny little group, that it's been crushed, it's not an issue. In this article we published in The Diplomat, we primarily looked at the CCP's own words, linked internal speeches, even stuff they've made publicly available on government websites and other sources. And we find indeed, again, looking at their own words, that's the opposite is true. Falun Gong for the last 25 years has remained a very top priority to control the population, to maintain political power, and sort of really retain ideological supremacy. And so I think that if you look at the substance of what this person did, this is exactly what some of the documents, including documents from his home province, were instructing him to do. Things like in-depth investigations, collect intelligence about Falun Gong and people who are supportive of Falun Gong. So he is conducting actions that are precisely what these leaked documents are instructing people like him to do.
And General, how Beijing's treatment of Falun Gong point to the larger issue of, say, CCP spies and the illicit activities they do in America? How bad is that situation?
Well, it's just as bad as the United States government allows it to be. So, they're integrated with our companies. They're integrated in our university system. They are buying property all around the country. And so ultimately, what happened after the end of the Cold War is that a lot of the controls that we had on the Soviet Union to prevent them from conducting active measures on America, from influencing our political process, for damaging our political independence and sovereignty, all those controls were taken off. And so the Chinese Communist Party as an organization really functions very similar to the Soviet Union functioned. And so it is trying to do the same things that the Soviet Union was doing, which is undermining our republic. Only now they're fully connected into our society in a way that the Soviet Union never had. And there's new tools like social media and the internet and global capital flows that they leverage. You look at the election that's going on right now, a lot of those donations, because of the way our election system works, a lot of those donations could very well be coming from Chinese nationals. And so this is a big challenge for us.
On that note, both of you are very knowledgeable about the long arm of Beijing. Given that, General, what is the most effective or worrisome aspect to you of Beijing's transnational repression?
Well, I think just the fact that we don't understand it and we don't realize that so the Chinese Communist Party has worked very hard to get control over the diaspora. And so it's not just the people that live within the geographic boundaries of China that we have to worry about. They have controlled media, they've controlled social media, using intimidation and force in China on family members to really tamp down on Chinese nationals that are operating outside the country, and that makes them all, unfortunately, it's sad to say, but it makes them all a vulnerability for our own political independence and sovereignty.
And Levi, what about you? What is the most worrisome aspect to you of Beijing's transnational repression?
I think it's their ability to shape our thoughts or at the very least control our behavior. I know, again, typically you think of hostile foreign nations and we're worried about, either kinetic war, we're worried about certainly capturing our industries, influencing our government policies, and that's certainly a problem with the CCP for the reasons that the General just outlined. But I think what's perhaps more insidious and in the long term more dangerous is their ability to convince our academia, our media, our policymakers of the narratives that they want to shape, and using social media, even bridging into our mainstream media. And I think, this CCP, as the General sort of laid out, is their goal is really to take down the U.S., I think, without firing a shot. And a cornerstone of that is making sure they can influence and manipulate how we think about issues they care about. And they're surprisingly and horrifically effective at that.
And based on that, Levi, give us some specific examples that lead you to that conclusion.
Well, I think the Falun Gong community is a prime example. If you just look back in China, the Chinese government itself was praising Falun Gong for its good health, its strong ethics, and so forth. Fast forward 2 years later, and suddenly it's a pariah. It's public enemy number one. It decided to rewrite history because Falun Gong got too popular. Well, it didn't, as the General just mentioned, it didn't stop at China's borders. And so for the last 25 years, they've been somewhat successful at rewriting the Falun Gong narrative, the Falun Gong history on the international stage, convincing our academia, our media, and everybody about false CCP propaganda narratives. And they've done a very good job at tuning those to the hot button issues of the United States so that even our media sometimes pick it up. So I think the Falun Gong story, what it was back in the 90s, what it is now, both in China and around the world, is a perfect example of how the CCP can indeed change and shape a narrative globally.
On that note, General, when you were the attaché to Beijing, you actually witnessed firsthand this transnational repression on Falun Gong on U.S. soil. Tell us about that.
Yes, during Trump's first meeting with Xi in Mar-a-Lago, I accompanied General Fang Fanghui to Mar-a-Lago. I was there with him on our plane ride back to New York to change planes to fly to Beijing. I happened to be sitting with some Chinese nationals that had looked like they had bandages on them, bruises, scrapes, and I started talking to them in Chinese, asking them what happened, and they said, the embassy people had come and beat them up, as they were trying to protest Xi being in Mar-a-Lago. And, this is not the first time I'd seen this. I've actually seen it prior when she had come to visit President Biden in Washington, D.C. And so this is a big problem. I think further to the point of, how successful the Chinese Communist Party has been, they've convinced our entire media that, the Falun Gong is some dangerous cult. And I think to the point of being able to control the narratives within our own society, not only are they physically harassing and beating people, but they're affecting our own media. It's also the same thing with Taiwan. We use this term reunification as if, Taiwan was ever a part of China. And again, the media has adopted China's words rather than recognizing, no, it's unification. It's unilateral unification without their desire. And so this ability to change the way we say things is very important, because the way you say things is the way you think. And this is very dangerous for our political independence and sovereignty. We need to get that influence out of our country.
And given what's at stake here that you both just laid out, Levi, what can people do about this?
Well, I think first of all, I think it's important that the government and authority figures speak out, because, America is the great marketplace of ideas, but if the CCP is the only one bringing a bunch of sour apples to the market and we don't provide sort of a fresh, honest alternative, they're going to adopt, that's what people are going to buy. And I think that's exactly what the general is talking about. So just this last week, it was the somber anniversary, the 25th anniversary of when the persecution started. We had the State Department making statements supporting Falun Gong, there are many other voices in Congress. That's important because those voices need to weigh in on this marketplace. And this struggle over the terminology that the general talked about and the broader ideas that come from that, our government, our leaders need to weigh in, because if they're absent from that, the CCP is going to control the narrative. And I think that's the first thing. And the second thing is we have something called the Falun Gong Protection Act, which is just passed by the House and it's before the Senate. Now, this is a piece of legislation that doles out real punishment. We need to get this through the Senate, get it onto the president's desk to sign, so that we can actually have the legal authority to the extent that we can, via sanctions, asset blocking, things of that nature, go after high-level, if necessary, high-level government officials, military leaders in China that are actively persecuting Falun Gong, going after the diaspora here, and really being behind the transnational repression that's affecting our entire country.
And General, what steps would you like to see implemented to counter this transnational repression and illicit spying by Beijing on U.S. soil?
Well, recognize again, we're in a competition for ideas, and how things are said are so important. The Chinese Communist Party has access to Chinese language media here. They have things like TikTok. Those things need to be eliminated. We actually need to bring back the U.S. Information Agency that used to do public diplomacy, so that we have an amplified voice, not only domestically but internationally. So we need to get the American message out there. Today, we're a shell of what we were during the first Cold War. We're in the second Cold War, and it's a digital Cold War. It's an information war, and it's using all the tools of Silicon Valley and the media. And so we need to understand those tools. Our political parties are actually well adapted to that environment because they fight each other. What they need to realize is the parties that are really the enemy is the Chinese Communist Party. And so they need to bring some of those tools into how the United States shapes its policy with regard to information warfare. The Chinese Communist Party is waging information warfare, psychological warfare on a global scale because of the tools that Silicon Valley and modern technology has brought to this new digital Cold War.
General Spalding, Levi Browde, thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
2 lawsuits against New York Governor Kathy Hochul for indefinitely pausing the New York City congestion pricing plan. New York City Comptroller Brad Lander made the announcement today. NTD's Fiona G has the details.
We have 2 lawsuits today. One based on the 2019 MTA Reform and Traffic Mobility Act, which requires the state to move forward with congestion pricing. The second lawsuit is based on the state constitution's right of every New Yorker to cleaner air.
Comptroller Brad Lander, along with community and environmental rights groups, are saying that Governor Kathy Hochul did not have the right or the authority to postpone the congestion pricing plan, which the governor did do around a month ago. However, the comptroller is worried that this indefinite postponement will turn into a permanent dismissal of the law, which he says should have gone into effect at the end of June.
Congestion pricing brings all those things. It is the revenue, it's the $15 billion that will pay for signal modernization so trains come on time, that will pay for accessible stations, and it also will reduce traffic and clean our air quality.
New Yorkers have mixed feelings about congestion tolling. Some who often take subways and buses are in agreement with the plan, saying that the public transit system needs a revamp and needs the money to do so. However, those who drive in and out of Manhattan often say that they are not in agreement with the plan because the pricing and the tolls would be a financial challenge for them.
I'm for it. I think New York really is the only true walkable city in the U.S., and reducing the amount of car traffic really improves that experience for everyday New Yorkers.
It's not good because they raised up fares, they raised up prices in supermarkets, inflation. So how is a New Yorkers and how do all of us supposed to live? We gotta pay rent. We gotta buy food, we gotta buy our kids stuff. So how can you survive with congestion prices?
Comptroller Lander says that if either one of the two current lawsuits against Governor Hochul rule in favor of congestion tolling, then the law will be compelled to go into place. However, it remains to be seen what decision exactly the courts will make. Fiona G., NTD News.
If passed, the law will require drivers to pay an unspecified fee for every entry into the Manhattan Central Business District. Previous estimates put the price at $36 for large trucks, $15 for individual cars, and between $1 and $3 for taxis and ride shares. Certain exemptions were expected, though a policy on that hasn't been confirmed. A former Uvalde, Texas school police officer pleaded not guilty during a court appearance today. He was part of the slow law enforcement response to the 2022 shooting at Robb Elementary School. Adrian Gonzalez was one of the almost 400 law enforcement personnel who responded to the scene. However, they waited more than 70 minutes to confront the shooter inside the school. Family members of the victims were in the courtroom with tears in their eyes. They watched as Gonzalez was arraigned on charges of abandoning and failing to protect children who were killed and wounded. Gonzalez was among the first officers to arrive. He was indicted on 29 charges that accuse him of abandoning his training and not confronting the shooter. That was even after hearing gunshots as he stood in the hallway. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Now for your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, a lot going on today, but let's start with what's been an ongoing Olympic case that finally has some resolution, as the U.S. Olympic figure skating team will be awarded gold medals from the 2022 Games. What was the latest holdup here?
Well, today it was the Court of Arbitration for Sport, or CAS. They rejected Russia's appeal to strip them of gold, after their star figure skater Kamila Valieva was given a 4-year retroactive ban for doping that starts just before the 2022 Olympic Games. So I think now Russia is actually out of options here. Now, if you remember, Valieva competed at the Games there. She was a revelation on the ice, led the Russians to gold, and then almost immediately afterward, it was revealed she tested positive for doping a couple months prior. Now, the Olympics continued to let her compete, but the issue of who won team gold took about 2 years to sort out. Now, finally, CAS gave her that 4-year ban in January. Russia appealed, and actually Canada did as well, because CAS ruled that minus Valieva's score, Russia still had enough for bronze. That still has to be sorted out if it's going to go now to Canada or Russia. But for the American team, it's possible they could actually get their golds at these Summer Olympics.
Shifting gears to the NBA, we have another ongoing saga here regarding the league's TV deal. On Monday, TNT announced they were matching Amazon's package, but the league is now rejecting it. Did they give a reason?
All they said it wasn't a true match. Now, they weren't specific about what wasn't the true part. Obviously, it couldn't be the numbers. I mean, the payments, that would have to be exactly the same, $1.8 billion a year. So I'm guessing maybe it was the streaming options. Now, Amazon Prime streams NFL games already, but TNT, it really is their parent company, Warner Brothers Discovery. They would probably have to stream games on Max. Now, they said the TNT seems miffed by this decision based on the comments here saying, quote, "We've matched Amazon's offer as we have a contractual right to do and do not believe the NBA can reject it," end quote. Now that's how I interpreted their match as well. It's not just a second option for the NBA to consider. Of course, I'm not a lawyer, but TNT said they would take appropriate action on this case, so it sounds like this is going to be decided in the courts.
Looking at WNBA news, rookie sensation Angel Reese has signed on to play in the new women's basketball league Unrivaled, which starts this winter. What sets this league apart from the WNBA?
Well, for one thing, it's going to be 3-on-3 instead of 5 against 5. Now, this league is actually started by a couple of current WNBA players. This is Brianna Stewart and Mafisa Collier, and it's being reported they'll pay higher salaries than what the WNBA has. Now, I'm sure part of this is in response to what happened to Brittany Griner in 2022. Spent a year jailed in Russia when she went over there to play basketball during the off-season. And WNBA players typically do that to supplement their income. I would think after what happened to Griner, though, players would be much more inclined to stay in the U.S. if the right opportunity came along, and maybe this is it. But the WNBA season, it's really only May through September. This league will start up in January. They'll play their games actually all in Miami. Reese is the 10th player to sign up. We haven't heard if Caitlin Clark is going to join her. Of course, Clark is her rival. Well, we will continue to follow this in the months to come.
Moving to baseball news, San Diego Padres pitcher Dylan Cease threw a no-hitter today, just the second in franchise history. Does it seem like this team is starting to put it together at the right time?
Yes, and this would be the right time. This is their 5th straight win. Only the Dodgers are ahead of them in the division. The Dodgers have had a number of injuries recently. And the Padres, they're more talented, I think, than their record shows. They have all-stars like Manny Machado, Xander Bogaerts, Fernando Tatis Jr. While Cease, he's part of a very good pitching rotation as well. Now, they spent bigger in recent years, bigger than their metropolitan area suggests. San Diego is not a huge area compared to a lot of the other teams. Now, for Cease's no-hitter today, it certainly also helps him in the Cy Young race. He leads the league in strikeouts, innings pitched. He's second in wins, but he's probably behind Chris Sale, maybe Zach Wheeler, maybe Pirates rookie Paul Skeens as far as the Cy Young race. But that's still got a couple months to go on that one.
Well, Davis Wallace, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you, Tiff.
And that's all for today's news. For around-the-clock coverage, you can visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.